Right. Okay, I've gone live. Okay, now I've unfortunately had to private last night's D&D game, where frankly I took over as GM and took the party onto a new set of missions in a new world that would be relatively familiar to just about everyone because it's medieval France or a variation of. Um, as a quick recap, I've basically somehow really budged up the sound last night, and there was a terrible echo. And anyone listening to that episode, I apologize. It was awful, and well, there's not much I can do about it now. So I'm going to just do a quick recording here to recap what happened. The party arrived back after facing the rhododendron queen, and got paid for their mission. So they all started out with an extra 2,000 gold, upon which point they were met by an unusual looking chap with a fairly sweaty, greasy, smelly handshake who beckoned them down an alleyway as he desperately needed their assistance for just a moment. Turned out the handshake was some sort of magical tag, and the party were teleported into a cave smelling of cheese. And they spoke to the chap who had teleported them there. It turned out he was a rabbi and was seeking their assistance to recover a control stone for a golem, in actual fact. And he had promised them great riches if they could retrieve this control stone, as he needed it to finish his golem so he could protect his people from the incoming Inquisition forces. He then took the party out from the cave to the local village where he lived, the village of Arce, which you can see the map of on the screen at the present moment. Unfortunately, because of, well, we're not quite sure why, but Marsh, who plays Gunnar the Artificer Dwarf, wasn't able to make it last night, so unfortunately a couple of mechanics that were put in place specifically for him, in actual fact, weren't able to kick off, but as a result, the party made their way into town and noticed that there was something going off in town, and that their guide slash abductor had received a message that the Inquisition was in town and immediately scurried off, promising to meet up with the party later in the pub, the Coq au Fromage, which is in the centre of town. At this point, all the party needed to do was make their way through the village, find the pub, sit down in the pub, order a bite to eat and some drinks, and stay quiet and not draw too much attention to themselves. They walked into the village, and fairly rapidly, a spell was cast. An interesting effect was noticed as CD cast his spell of befriending the local blacksmith's dog, and also it was also noticed that that everyone here was speaking in Elvish, and that the only person that could understand them was Gregory, who was our resident elf. However, these weren't elves; these were not elves, as I said before. These are actually peasant French folk. Party made their way through town and spoke to a few people. Noticed that there was generally a hustle and bustle in town because something was cracking off, and that something was indeed the Inquisition making their way up through the south of town. The party got to the pub, somehow managed to accomplish all of that small feat without creating too much hassle. I'll be honest, I was surprised. I was expecting a fight to break out fairly rapidly, but they made it to the pub. They sat down, and there was an incident with some coinage that wasn't obviously from around there, and as a result, got themselves kicked out of the pub by the landlord, who they had managed to convince that they weren't giving him solid silver, and were in fact giving him counterfeit coins that had no value. He got rather upset about this. He thought he was getting solid silver, which was valued far more highly than the simple coins that he was charging people. Charged them 1.5 francs for a couple of bottles of wine, and they'd paid with a solid lump of silver, which was worth several times more than he'd charged them. Anyway, they had been kicked out of the pub. They go outside and come face to face with the Inquisition, and a certain amount of tension arrived. Head Inquisitor, Inquisitor Cider, was questioning a number of the townsfolk, including the town priest, as to what was going off, and seemed to have the local town prostitutes and someone who was using their services in chains, and proceeded to carry them off. Whilst the rest of the town watched this in horror, our party decided to get involved. And, well, one or two things happened. It became very evident that the Inquisition was very surprised that Grace was capable of using divine magic, and when she did so, glowed with the same holy light that they did when they were carrying out their holy orders. And actually, this probably saved the party's life at this point. They proceeded to beg, and at one point, Grigori essentially prostrated himself in front of the head Inquisitor and told him to that they'd been dragged there against their will by the rabbi who had brought them there, and told him that they would comply completely and tell them everything if they would be so kind as to not murder them. At this point, the Inquisitor and the Inquisition invited the party to head off out of town and join them at their camp. And as their party walked out of town, they unfortunately witnessed the aforementioned town prostitutes and their John being, well, broken on the wheel, I believe is the term, as they left. So we will pick up the next week. That was the full 4 hours. In recap, then we'll pick up next week with the party at the Inquisitor's camp. They did notice that at least one of the village buildings was burning on the way out of town. I'm not going to give a spoiler as to what that was, but it was hinted at in the episode that the prostitutes probably worked for the barman, and they were being questioned whilst being put on the wheel, so it is reasonable to assume that the pub in the village is now gone. As I said, we'll pick up next week with the beginning of the questioning of the party as to what they know about said rabbi, and what they're going to do about that, and how they're going to get out of a rather sticky situation, because it was noted that said at least the chief inquisitor might be somewhat more powerful, or at least as powerful as the party themselves. So anyway, I just thought I'd give that quick recap, because I've had to take the stream down, so I thought, yeah, we may as well sort of have some sort of record of what's gone off, and so people can catch up with it next week. And in fact, I just see Theo in the chat there. Hi, Theo. Yeah, I've had to recap the last night's stream because the audio was absolutely awful. And again, I apologise to anyone that is listening to them that stream had to come down because it was impossible to hear. Essentially, I was silent, and everybody else had a terrible, terrible echo. And yeah, so in fact, I can see people in the chat as well. Hi, Ginger. Yeah, the audio was unbearable. You know what? I might leave it back up there if anybody wants to see it, but again, I apologise. So I've just done a quick recap for anyone listening. Anyway, I'll catch you all next week, and see you all soon.